Okay, hope you're having a good evening. So this video will be focusing on particles. So I'll create a series of particle videos. Each one will get more complicated as we go along and we'll experiment more. But for this one, this first video, we'll just create a simple particle trail. So we're going to create a new empty scene. We're going to go to our world tab and we're going to add an axis. Next, we're going to add geometry tab. So we're going to go to particle system, which we need, and you'll see it's completely blank in the renderer because we need to apply an emitter and also assign a particle, like a object to emit. So it would either be a mesh or or a sprite or whatever you want. So we're going to say grid. There are many emitters, but for this one, we're going to do grid. And we're going to apply a sprite. So click on module and then say sprite. So as you can see, we can see our grid 4x4. If you click on the grid options, you can see here 4x4, and we have a 4x4 grid with a sprite emitting from the grid. Now I want to change the count to 0 on the Y, and on the size Y also to 0, which will put this bang in the center of our screen, and increase the scale and the count. So what I want to do is on the X, I want to say put let's say 200 in here, and on this size X, just scale this out. Now we have a nice line of particles. Now what I want to do is taper one end of the particles, so we want it to be large one end and then just get smaller at the other. So we're going to go modules and we're going to use a texture, and for this we're going to go place this in between the grid and the sprite. So you'll notice it automatically affects the color and the alpha when you apply that texture. So what we're going to do is change that target to size, and now you can see it's affecting the size of the particles of each of these sprites. Each particle, as you can see, is based on this black and white texture. So what we're going to do is change our loader, this default loader, to a gradient 1D, and we're going to just use this one black and white ramp, and you can see we get this nice taper. And you may notice this little particle at the end here, this little dot. Now the reason for this is because our texture is a wrap. So if I change this to transparent border, now the texture doesn't repeat, so now we just have it one time. Okay, so it's looking nice. Now maybe you want to scale the particle up slightly. So if you click on the sprite, you can increase that sprite size, and there you go. Now you can see a lot more better. You can get this nice taper. Now if you want to close those gaps, you can increase your count. So if I was to say maybe 250, and you can see it's just making it more dense, and making those particles a lot tighter by packing in more particles. But for something like this, maybe we don't need that many. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to keep it at 200 for now, and you can bring it down or put it up later on. It's up to you. Anyway, this is pretty boring, it's just it's a streak, it's like a drop. So let's make it a bit more interesting. So let's add some noise. So now when you add the module noise, you notice it appears here. However, it's not affecting what's happening in our hierarchy or our particles, because the hierarchy here is wrong. So what you need to do is make sure you place this after the before the sprite. So the sprite is always at the end, the very end. Or if it's a mesh, if you decide to use a mesh, again, okay, if I swap this out for a mesh, you can see these are cubes. Now switch them out. It's entirely up to you, or it could be cones or whatever, but you make sure that is at the very end of your hierarchy. There's a specific way that your particle system needs to be built. Anyway, so this module here, I want this module to be a sprite for them, nice and clean. Okay, so I'll make these nice and big. There we go. So we've got a nice thing. Now what I can do is I can play around with the noise. So if I start to scale this, can make it really ridiculous or make it really small. and that's up to you and your preference on you know what you want to try to create in the look. But there you go, we've got a nice trap code particular effect, you know, where you got the nice wiggly trail that you've seen, you know, in After Effects and stuff. Just with a few notes, you know, nothing too complicated. It's just knowing the order of to place things. For example, if I was to take the noise and place it after the sprite, you know, it wouldn't work. Okay, same goes for if I take the texture and place it here, you know, I'll get a completely different result. So your hierarchy of your particle system is quite important, yeah, to get things right. But you kind of learn as you go along, in the same way you build your hierarchy here. It has to be like an axis, then a color, then it's the object at the end. You know, texture, object, mapping it onto. It's the same principle from what I get understand. Anyway, let's move on. So now it's pretty boring, you know, we just got this tadpole thing just sitting in the middle of the screen. So let's add some color to it. So I'm going to say texture, and again I'm going to place it on here, and you can see the texture is applying the color to it, because right now we're targeting the color and the alpha. And again I'm going to just assign a gradient, and I'll use the color spectrum. There we go. So the reason I choose the texture instead of using the module gradient is I have the options to, you know, change the mapping on this texture. So if I want to animate the gradient, or if it was a texture I had in instead of a gradient, you know, I got the mapping properties that I can play around with here, and it's a lot easier as well. So yeah, I'm going to just simplify this gradient. You know, it's a bit, you know, got a bit too much, so I'm just going to maybe have it 2 colors, and you know, there we go. And maybe make the sprite a tiny bit smaller. There we go. Now you can see here where it's starting to, like, the particles are starting to, like, you know, open up, and the gaps are kind of bigger. So if I want to tighten this, like I said, you can increase this, like, or decrease it and tighten it. So what's to do? So 500, you can see how dense that is, and you know, it's up to you. So maybe for 50, just play around with it depending on what the look you're trying to go for. So we have a particle, you know, and it's nothing fancy. Anyway, and you've got phase. Now you can animate this. If you want to animate this wiggling all the time, you can. It's entirely up to you. You've got fall off, and you've got a mount, so maybe you want just a tiny bit. I want a tiny bit, nothing too extreme, but yeah, you can, it's up to you how much you want to play with that. On the rotation as well. There we go, something like this. It's up to you. Now if I want to animate this and make it like actually fly through, where we click on the first texture where we applied here, the translate Y, all I have to do is drag the Y, and you see I'm flying through it. I'm just revealing that texture. I'm animating the gradient, and it's going large to small as it disappears through. So that's one way of animating this, you know. So now we've got a nice path trail, light streak, or whatever you want to call it, and as it kind of tapers off as it starts to, you know, get longer. I'm gonna change the scale down a bit. There we go. And I don't like the noise right now. That twist is a bit rotation, so I want to just reset this in there. Move some of these. There we go. Something I'm happy with until I'm happy with it. But yeah, like I said, there's no rules on how that looks. Anyway, until you're happy with it. Anyway, there you go. So I've got a nice wiggly line going across the screen. Now what I want to do is have a secondary emitters, particles emit off of the existing particles here. So what we need to do is add a module, and we're going to say link out. This link out here, I'm going to place it here for now. We'll pass the positions of the particles that we want to emit off. So it's going to pass where this particle sits in this world, and you know, we're going to add that. So I'm going to go here, add another new inline stream module, and we're going to choose secondary, and it says create a stream of particles at each position of a particle read from a buffer. So if I drop that in, it's going to be red because it needs a few more modules for it to work. So we need the simulation module, which is the special, so simulation, and we also need a sprite to render out. And as you can see now, it's simulating it's emitting these particles off our first one. So it's emitting off these particles, like it says, it emits each of each particle. And then we've got this. Now we want a bit more, this is kind of chaos, and we've got a lot of this, so we can control this if we want. So maybe the position, I want to zero this out, and you can see now it starts to tighten up. And on the random, I can also zero this out, and it will tighten up, and it's kind of almost, it's just sitting inside the other particle system. So we've got one on top of the other. Now the lifetime span I want to reduce to say something like 0.5, so it doesn't last as long. And I wish to apply a curl noise. Let's use the curl noise for this one. And now the curl noise needs to go before the simulation. So now you can see we've got a curl noise, and I'm going to change that speed all. So I'll bring the speed down. You can see I'll just reduce this a little bit, so now it's not going too far. And now I can change the scale all, and just experiment until a look I want. So I can go really crazy, I can go really fast. It's entirely up to you the look you want. I'm gonna go for this nice kind of ribbony look, like something like this. Experiment, and I'll bring that scale size of those particles slightly down. There we go. So something like this. Now what I want it to actually do is emit the same color as our particle trail. Now you can, of course, say if I choose a gradient here, for example, I can use this gradient and say, okay, this is gonna use this color here, and it's red and blue, and it's gonna, these particles, secondary ones, have its own color. You can do that. However, I want it to take the color from the existing trail, so I'm gonna go to my first inline stream, and where it says link out, I'm going to place this in front of my particles, my gradient color. So now that's passing this color out to this, the same way you would pass a material when you place an object over an axis. And I have a color, and I'm passing this through to this rectangle, and I have an axis. Say I have a second object in a cylinder or something. This color is now passing from here, and it's going to pass to this, because it's passing that information to both of these. It's the same, it works the same way, the hierarchy. You're saying pass this out, and then pass it to this. It's just the same thing. It's the same way in the material tab as well. It works the same way. You're passing above, or you're passing out. It's just that you have to use this node link out. Anyway, let's now animate this and make it interactive. So right now we got this kind of cool path that's just kind of, it doesn't do anything. We just got this line of particles, and we want to see it animate. So we need to use a mover. So we're going to use we're going to animate this first texture on the Y translate, and I'm going to get an animation mover. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to say minus 1.405 to 1. Okay, from the min and max. I'm going to uncheck swing. I'm going to take that translate Y, which is there, so minus 1.05 is off the screen, and then if I go to 1, it will be the other half of the screen. So you never saw it, it just jumped, I just jumped between it, so it's going from there to there. Okay, if I reset it to 0, it's in the middle. Okay, so I can take that translate Y and then use it on the mover, and now you can see the trail, the path is like zooming across, and then these kind of like, you know, just kind of dissipate off the secondary ones. Now I can change the speed of this, so say 2 seconds, like that. And now we want to have more control over this. Right now you can, if you're happy with that and you know you just wanted some looping particle effect on your screen, yeah, there you go, you can just do that. I want this to be a bit more interactive, so I'm going to make this a one shot, so that the only time it will trigger is when I ever hit nudge, and then we'll see that particle. So now what we can do is let's just create a button on the screen. So we're going to add an axis, almost done here, and then I'll call it a night. So I'm going to use a you know, you can use whatever shape you want. I'll just place a rounded rectangle on the screen, make that nice and round, and this is my button. Okay, and I'm not going to do any fancy button animation or textures. I'll leave that up to you to do or to design. I'm just going to get the interaction tab. I'm going to use touch button like so, and what we want to do is shift select this with our particle system, our button, and we want to link the nudge to our touch button. So here we go, and single tap. So now every time we click on our button, you notice it nudges. Now I'm going to just be a little bit extra. Like I said I'm not going to do anything too fancy. I'm just going to, so you can see that I'm clicking the button. I'm going to take the button itself and just going to do the scale all. I'll change this to one shot. Okay, and it'll be 1 to, let's say, 0.5, and the duration to 0.5. Okay, so now the button, this one, I'll shift select this like so, and link this nudge to this button, single tap. So now the button will react to, you know, the scale of that button. There you go. So now every time I click that, you can see we're triggering our particle system. Now we get this nice cool trail, like I said. Of course, play around with this. Now you can add post effects onto this as well. So maybe you want to add a bloom, or you know, maybe you don't want to affect the, I don't want the button to have a bloom. So maybe I'll just use the effects and place this in front of my particle system, and then go here and say I want to add the glare. There you go, and I've got a nice glare. You know, I can increase that green. You can see, boom. Increase that diameter, boom. I've got nice glowing particles, you know. And then anytime I want, what I can do is go to that particle system. You know, maybe I want to increase that count on the y-axis. So maybe let's say we want 2 more, and we want to spread these out so they don't clash. There we go. Now we've got 2 particles, you know, 2 trails. Again, I can increase that count to 4. Boom, 4 lines. Yeah, so you know, once you do that, you know, you can play around and you can build on it, and you know, have a play around, try the different emitters. I'll put this back to 0 and 0, so we just have 1 trail, but you get the idea. If you don't like those trail, you know, the secondary particles emitting off of that, you can of course disable those. So to disable something, you see here the little checkbox, and it disables it. So the same way it makes it inactive. So now we just got the 1 trail. So it's entirely up to you, optional what you create. Or I can go here and, you know, I can maybe change my scale on that and make this really crazy. As you can see, I can change the speed all, and now I can get a completely crazy effect, you know. And you see, I can get so many different effects and looks, and you know, just have fun playing around with it. Phase, there we go. You can see I can get different variations, and also we don't need to stick with the particles that we're using. So this right here is a texture, so if I wanted to maybe change this texture of this sprite, of the secondary sprites, and instead of it being a sphere, if I open this up, I can go to this loader, change the loader to a star, for example. Now I've got stars. Now they're really small, so what I can do is go to the sprite, increase the sprite size. Let's just set it to 1, really big. I've got these really big stars. You know, that's really extreme, but you get the idea. Or let's say 0.5. Boom. You know, maybe even smaller. Maybe that's too big, but you get the idea. You know, it doesn't have to be what, you know, what those textures are. You get a completely different look and a feel for each one. And now I have to bring this down and bring this down. There we go. Adjust my gain and my thing. There we go. But yeah, don't be afraid to experiment. Try different things. There you go. You might want to change this this grid. Maybe you want to go and explore and see what the grid does, or maybe we say, what happens if I change this grid to this, whatever this will adjust. You know, it might get a completely different thing. It might not work. It might, you know, it might break you. But yeah, but there's no harm in it. You know, you can always go back to a grid. We got a 4x4 grid. There we go. Boom. Okay, a completely different look. You know, don't feel that you break anything. You know, experimenting with stuff. That's the only way you'll learn. Or I'll learn anyway. I just press all the buttons. That's what I say. Press all the buttons. You know, there you go. But there. Hope you enjoy your evening, morning, night, or day. Thank you again. And I'll make a next video soon, hopefully. Happy. Bye bye. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share and like and leave a comment. Bye bye. I go now.